This is my true story. My son David thought his physical strength made him the ruler of the house that I had built with my very own hands in our quiet suburb outside Chicago, Illinois. One evening, right in front of his wife Emily, he lifted his hand against me. Not just once or twice, but 15 times in total. Each and every slap was accompanied by her smirking face and soft, mocking laughter, as though I was nothing more than a pathetic joke to them. I remained completely silent during the entire ordeal. I carefully counted every single strike that landed on my face. My cheeks were burning intensely, but inside me, my resolve turned ice-cold and unbreakable. David truly believed he had utterly humiliated me that night. What he did not know was that I still legally held the deed to the entire property. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is where you are right now. I remember the early days like they happened yesterday. David was just a young boy with scraped knees, running through the streets of our Chicago neighborhood chasing after a baseball. He would look up at me with those wide, admiring eyes that truly believed I could build absolutely anything in the world. And perhaps, in his young mind, I really could. I personally taught him how to properly swing a hammer, how to measure a perfectly straight line, and how to cut wood so every piece fit together, flush and strong. We spent countless hours working side by side when he was still young, his small hands struggling to imitate my own movements. He was so proud the first time he managed to drive a nail straight in without bending it even once. Those precious moments led me to believe they would shape him into a man who deeply respected hard work, effort, and real sacrifice. When David grew older, I stepped in and co-signed all the mortgage papers for the house where he and Emily would live in Illinois. The bank required a reliable guarantor with a solid history and trustworthy credit. And that responsibility fell to me alone. I saved every dollar I possibly could, scraped together money for years, went without buying new shoes during the freezing Chicago winters, and patched holes in my old boots instead. I worked endless overtime shifts so my family could have far more comfort than I ever experienced growing up. I signed those important mortgage documents with a completely steady hand, never once imagining that those same hands would later be struck repeatedly by my own son. At that time, all I felt was immense pride in helping him. Pride that David now had a strong roof over his head in a safe American suburb. Pride that he could live in real comfort while I quietly carried the heavy financial burden. That house meant far more to me than just wood and brick construction. It represented my blood and my sweat poured into every single wall and beam. It stood for the countless hours I labored under scorching sun and pouring rain to make it possible. It was the ultimate gift from a father, the kind given freely without any question or expectation of repayment. For many years afterward, I would drive past it and feel a deep, quiet satisfaction whenever I saw the warm lights glowing at night. I would think to myself, my son is safe and secure. When I watched him mowing the lawn on summer weekends, I thought, my son is steady and responsible, seeing Emily standing at the door with a smile. I thought, my son has truly found his own good life here in America. I believed, perhaps too naively, that real gratitude lived somewhere deep in his heart, even if he never expressed it openly. But as time passed, the harsh truth became heavier and harder to ignore. The house that was intended as a lifelong blessing gradually turned into my greatest source of grief. David slowly forgot where it had truly come from, and who made it all possible. He completely forgot whose signature had opened every door for him. He began speaking and acting as though the entire achievement was solely his own, as if my hands had never touched even the foundation stones. The gratitude I had quietly imagined slowly hardened into pure arrogance. and that arrogance eventually transformed into outright cruelty. Yet I continued to stay silent and patient through it all. A father always holds on to hope for his child. A father finds ways to excuse bad behavior. A father chooses to believe the very best, even when the painful truth stares him in the face. I kept telling myself that David was simply young, overly proud, and still finding his path in life. I convinced myself that genuine respect would eventually return as he matured. But that endless patience slowly became the rope tightening around my own throat. I had given him absolutely everything a father possibly could. And then one terrible night, right in front of Emily, he repaid all of it with 15 harsh slaps across my face. As my skin burned from each blow, countless memories came rushing back to me. The image of the small boy who once looked up to me while holding that hammer. The house I had so generously given him without hesitation. The mortgage papers I signed with pride. The many meals I skipped to save money, and the endless overtime hours I worked. All the grief that had begun with loving sacrifice ended that night in complete and utter humiliation. What started as a proud gift had slowly turned into deep grief, and that grief eventually froze into a rage as cold as steel in winter. It did not begin with actual fists or violence at first. It never really does. It started with sharp, careless words thrown across the dinner table like small knives. Emily laughed at every single cutting remark he made. She kept pouring his drinks and leaning in closer, encouraging him as he grew bolder with each sip. He called me old man and dead weight right to my face. I sat there quietly at the table, my food completely untouched, my hands resting calmly in place. I kept telling myself to remain calm and just breathe steadily. Then came the first hard shove against my shoulder, strong enough to jolt me back and make the whole room burst into laughter. And once that cruel laughter filled the air, real cruelty finally found its full courage. He slapped me once, the sharp sound ringing out clearly. The immediate sting spread quickly across my cheek. Before I could even process it, the second slap landed harder, hurting far more from the deep shame than from any physical force. Emily quickly covered her mouth with her hand, pretending to be shocked, but clearly enjoying every moment behind it. David looked around the room with obvious pride, as if striking his own father somehow made him appear bigger and stronger. The painful count continued to rise steadily. 3, 4, 5, each one accompanied by another curse or fresh insult. 6, 7, 8. My face burned hotter with every impact. My eyes began to water, but I absolutely refused to let tears fall. 9, 10, 11. The entire room started to blur, not from the force alone, but from the overwhelming weight of humiliation pressing down on me. 12, 13, 14. His hand began to tire, but his cruel pride kept pushing him forward. 15. When that final slap finally landed, the room fell silent for one brief moment, and then Emily actually clapped her hands together as if it had all been some entertaining show. My chest rose and fell slowly and heavily as I fought for control. I could taste blood inside my mouth, but I swallowed it quietly. I would never give them the satisfaction of seeing me break or spit it out. My hands remained folded neatly in my lap the entire time. My back stayed perfectly straight, no matter what. I refused to raise my voice even once. I refused to strike back in any way. I simply sat there, still and silent, while they continued to laugh at my expense. They clearly interpreted my silence as total weakness and surrender. They believed my stillness meant complete defeat on my part. But what they could not see was the fire burning inside my chest, slowly turning to solid ice. That horrible, ugly evening became the longest hour I had ever endured in my entire life. Each of those 15 slaps was far more than just skin striking skin. Each one erased a cherished memory of better times. Each one destroyed another piece of hard-earned respect. Each one was like spitting directly on 30 full years of quiet sacrifice. David did not merely hit my face 15 separate times. He effectively struck every nail I had ever driven into wood, every hard-earned dollar I had saved, every exhausting hour I had worked to provide for him. And when it was finally over, I slowly rose from the table, gave one single nod, and walked straight out the door without uttering a word. There was no shouting from me, no begging, just complete silence. But deep within that silence, a firm and irreversible decision began to take shape. The physical slaps ended that night, but the deep shame they caused did not fade away easily. Bruises eventually heal and swelling goes down over time. But true humiliation does not simply disappear with the passing days. It follows you everywhere you go. It clings to your every step. It waits quietly in every dark corner of your life. The very next morning, when I stepped outside our house in Illinois, I noticed neighbors standing on their porches watching me carefully. They would look directly at me for a moment, then quickly turn their eyes away as if ashamed. Some shook their heads slowly, while others whispered among themselves. The terrible sound of my public humiliation had spread faster than the morning wind through our Chicago area neighborhood. Emily had made absolutely sure of that exposure. She had taken out her phone that night, smiling directly at the camera as if the whole thing was some kind of celebration or party. She recorded videos and snapped pictures, then posted them online with smug, mocking captions about respecting elders. By the next morning, far more people across the area had seen the footage than I ever wished would know about it. What should have remained a private family matter, something that never should have happened at all, was now common knowledge throughout the community. The house I had built and proudly given to David had become the very stage for my total degradation. Once that home represented my greatest pride and accomplishment as a father. Now it felt like nothing more than a prison holding me captive in endless shame. Every single brick that stood strong now seemed to mock me openly. Every protective wall that once offered shelter now felt like it was trapping me deeper in disgrace. Neighbors who used to nod politely and stop to chat now found excuses to stay far away. Close friends who once visited regularly began avoiding our home altogether. Even extended family members started speaking to me in softer, pity-filled voices rather than with warmth and respect. Their eyes carried shame when they looked at me instead of admiration. It was not simply the 25 slaps themselves that caused the deepest pain. It was the fact that the entire world now knew every detail. What should have stayed private and hidden had become a public spectacle for all to judge. I heard young children whispering as I walked past them on the sidewalk. I heard adults deliberately lowering their voices whenever I approached nearby. The physical sting from David's hand had begun to fade from my cheeks, but the sharp sting of constant whispers remained painfully fresh in my ears every single day. I felt like a man who had been completely stripped of his rightful place in the world. The proud father who built a home, who gave everything, who sacrificed without complaint, had been replaced in everyone's eyes by the old man who was slapped 15 times by his own son in front of his laughing wife. That humiliating label became my new name in the community. That became my unwanted title among neighbors and friends. That was exactly what people now thought of when they saw me walking down the street. Inside the house, the silent cruelty felt even worse than the public whispers. David walked through the rooms as though absolutely nothing had happened that night. Emily smiled sweetly at him, while brushing past me as if I were nothing more than invisible furniture. They laughed together freely in the kitchen, their joyful sounds carrying down the hallway and filling the entire home with a happiness that cut me far deeper than any physical slap ever could. They openly treated my deep pain as nothing more than a private joke between them, something to feel proud of retelling. I could hear their constant laughter echoing through the thin walls, louder and more piercing than any Midwest storm outside. That house, the very one I had given them with love, had completely turned against me in every way. It no longer felt like any kind of home to me at all. It had become undeniable proof of my own foolishness for giving far too much. Proof that I had trusted far too blindly all those years. Proof that I had tragically mistaken arrogance for real strength in my son. And as the difficult days dragged on, the heavy shame only grew larger instead of shrinking away. Each new whisper from neighbors, each mocking laugh I overheard, each avoiding glance added even more crushing weight to my chest. But shame always has two distinct faces to it. One face brings nothing but pain and suffering. The other face brings unexpected clarity and vision. And as I carried the heavy burden of the first face daily, the second face of clarity slowly began to grow stronger inside me. They had brazenly turned my generous gift into their personal stage for cruelty and mockery. They had turned my patient silence into the punchline of their joke. They had tried everything to reduce my hard-earned dignity to nothing but ashes. But they had completely forgotten one absolutely critical thing: the legal papers, the deed, the official title to the property. The house that David arrogantly thought was his permanent kingdom still carried only my name on every official document. He had openly mocked and struck me inside walls that I still fully controlled legally. And while the entire world laughed at the online videos Emily posted, I quietly began to plan my response in the shadows. That same night, once the house finally grew quiet and everyone slept, I could not find any rest at all. I sat alone at the old wooden kitchen table with just one small lamp burning softly. The gentle yellow light fell across the familiar walls, but my heart had grown hard and cold as stone. I carefully pulled out the old shoebox I kept hidden under my bed for decades. It was the same simple box that held all the most important papers of my entire life. Old letters from family, faded receipts, but above all, the deeds and property titles that mattered most. I placed them one by one on the table and spread them out carefully like cards in a serious game. My hands trembled slightly as I handled them, but not from any fear whatsoever. They trembled purely from the immense weight of the power I now held again. There it was, clear as day, the official title to the suburban Chicago house, the very house David constantly bragged about owning, the same house where he had slapped me 25 times without mercy, the same house where Emily had laughed and clapped throughout the ordeal. His name appeared nowhere on that document. Only mine did. The full mortgage remained in my name alone. The guarantee was entirely mine. The complete property ownership was legally mine without question. The same aging hands he had struck repeatedly were the same hands that still legally owned every single brick he walked across daily. I thought back clearly to the day I first signed those mortgage papers years ago. I had stood tall and proud in the bank, feeling only joy at giving my son something stable I never had growing up. I sincerely believed I was building a bright and secure future for him and his family. But staring at the title now under that dim lamplight, I saw everything in a completely different way. It was no longer simply a loving gift in my eyes. It had slowly become a heavy chain that David had wrapped tightly around my neck over the years, pulling it tighter with every slap, every cruel insult, and every smug smirk from Emily. But chains like that can always be broken when you hold the right key. And that long night, I finally realized without doubt that I held the only key to freedom. I sat there for many quiet hours reading every single line of the documents slowly and carefully. My eyes traced each word with complete focus because I wanted absolutely no mistakes and no lingering doubts. Every legal clause, every official signature, every stamped seal reminded me clearly that the law stood firmly on my side no matter what. The entire world might mock me because of those videos, but the law would never mock my valid ink and ownership. The law would listen carefully to my documented rights, the same way it would ignore my son's empty laughter and pride. And that simple truth gave me renewed strength I had not felt in years. I finally closed the shoebox gently, placed the crucial title right on top, and rested my steady hand upon it. My fingers pressed down until I could clearly feel my own pulse beating through them. For the first time since those 15 slaps, I no longer felt completely powerless in my own life. I felt true control slowly returning, quiet but certain, like fresh water filling an empty cup drop by drop. They genuinely thought they had broken me beyond repair that night. They thought they had stripped away every last shred of my dignity forever. They thought they had reduced me to nothing more than a laughable joke in everyone's eyes. But in that quiet moment staring at the title, I knew the real truth they remained blind to. The actual joke was entirely on them from the beginning. Those legal papers were not just meaningless words printed on a page. They were powerful weapons far sharper than any fist could ever be. They were heavy hammers that carried more real weight than violent hands. My son David had completely forgotten who originally signed his comfortable life into existence decades ago. He had forgotten who provided the solid roof that protected him from every storm. He had forgotten that the same old man he mocked and slapped 15 times was still the same man the law fully recognized as the true and only owner of his entire world. And in that dark, quiet night, I finally remembered everything clearly myself. I folded the important title with great care, slid it safely back into the shoebox, and closed the lid firmly. My final decision was not loud or explosive in any way. It was not driven by burning fiery anger. It was not made in hasty rush. It formed cold and deliberate, like fresh ice slowly forming across a completely still pond in winter. Tomorrow would bring action without further delay. Tomorrow I would finally remind him of the undeniable truth he had ignored for so long. The house he believed belonged to him forever was still fully mine on every legal record, and I was now determined to take it back completely. When the shoebox was safely returned under my bed and the lamp turned low for the night, I sat alone in the growing darkness and carefully considered all my remaining choices. I could have screamed loudly that night when his hand first struck me. I could have immediately called the police to report the assault. I could have run straight to neighbors, shown them my fresh bruises, and begged desperately for their help and support. But loud noise alone never truly builds lasting respect in anyone's eyes. Screaming in anger rarely repairs a man's shattered dignity. The louder any man fights in public, the smaller and weaker he ultimately appears when nobody listens or cares. I had already been forcibly made small once at that dinner table in front of Emily and her cruel laughter. I refused with every fiber of my being to ever be made small again by anyone. So I deliberately chose silence as my weapon instead. Silence that felt far colder than any words. Silence that would last much longer than fading bruises. Silence that would not disappear or heal like temporary marks on skin. David believed his repeated fists proved he held all the real power. Emily believed her constant smirks and laughter made her clever and untouchable. But neither of them truly understood the immense, quiet weight of legal paper and ownership. Neither grasped how cold and incredibly sharp a simple father's signature could ultimately become. They had mocked and humiliated me on floors I had personally built, under a roof I had fully paid for, inside walls that still bore only my legal name. If my deep humiliation had taken place within those very walls, then my measured justice would take place there as well without question. I could already clearly picture the shocked look that would cross David's face when he finally returned home to discover his entire life suddenly gone. The explosive anger in his voice when he realized the locks no longer responded to his key. The complete confusion and panic in Emily's eyes as strangers carried out all their furniture piece by piece. Strangers calmly walking through her once private kitchen while the comfortable world they built entirely on my back slowly crumbled into dust before them. They would finally learn the hard lesson they had refused to accept earlier in life. The same hand that generously gives can also decisively take everything away. My firm decision was not simple revenge for the temporary pain across my cheek that would eventually heal. My decision stood for the irreplaceable dignity they had deliberately tried to steal from me forever. A devoted father can often forgive honest mistakes made in youth. A loving father can overlook moments of excessive pride. But no father anywhere can ever truly forgive 25 repeated slaps across the face followed by the cold laughter and clapping of a wife who watched it all with enjoyment. That went far beyond ordinary cruelty into pure contempt for everything I represented. And contempt like that always deserves real and lasting consequence. So I made the final choice to sell the house without any further delay. Not tomorrow or next week, but immediately and completely. I would offer no advance warning to either of them. I would not speak a single word about my plans. I would never give David the opportunity to beg, to make empty promises, or to tell more lies to save himself. He would leave for work that morning fully believing his comfortable world remained perfectly secure and unshakable. And while he sat at his job laughing with coworkers, that entire world would quietly collapse around him piece by piece with every stroke of my pen on legal forms. I leaned back slowly in my old chair and took a long, deep breath that night. The cold air outside felt sharp against the windows, but inside, I felt even colder with resolve. My heavy heart was no longer weighed down by endless shame alone. It had become steady and filled with clear purpose instead. That was the exact moment I knew without any doubt that my choice was completely final and irreversible. Like the arrival of a harsh Midwestern winter, slow and steady without any mercy whatsoever. Nothing could stop what was now coming. Tomorrow I would walk directly into my trusted lawyer's office in downtown Chicago, place the official title squarely on his desk, and begin the quiet but unstoppable storm that would finally strip my son of the house he wrongly believed was his forever. Every legal clause, every official signature, every stamped seal reminded me clearly that the law stood firmly on my side no matter what. The entire world might mock me because of those videos, but the law would never mock my valid ink and ownership. The law would listen carefully to my documented rights, the same way it would ignore my son's empty laughter and pride. And that simple truth gave me renewed strength I had not felt in years. I finally closed the shoebox gently, placed the crucial title right on top, and rested my steady hand upon it. My fingers pressed down until I could clearly feel my own pulse beating through them. For the first time since those 15 slaps, I no longer felt completely powerless in my own life. I felt true control slowly returning, quiet but certain, like fresh water filling an empty cup drop by drop. They genuinely thought they had broken me beyond repair that night. They thought they had stripped away every last shred of my dignity forever. They thought they had reduced me to nothing more than a laughable joke in everyone's eyes. But in that quiet moment staring at the title, I knew the real truth they remained blind to. The actual joke was entirely on them from the beginning. Slaps had been his final gift to me as a father. The deep silence that followed became my gift in return to him. But the house itself, that was entirely mine to take back without apology. The very next morning, I woke long before the sun rose over Illinois. The entire house remained perfectly still in the sharp, cold air of dawn. I put on the same old coat that David had once openly mocked for being worn and outdated. I carefully brushed the dust from my shoes, tucked the precious shoebox securely under my arm, and began walking down the familiar quiet street. My steps were deliberately slow but completely steady and determined. I was not walking out to go to work that day. I was not walking to beg anyone for help or mercy. I was walking with purpose to finally reclaim what had always been rightfully mine from the start. At the lawyer's comfortable office, the steady heat from the old radiator filled the room warmly, but I still carried the deep cold of my unbreakable resolve inside me. The lawyer was a trusted man I had known professionally for many years in the Chicago area. He looked up at me kindly, then down at the shoebox, and asked softly what brought me in so early. I did not burden him with the painful story of repeated slaps or the crushing public humiliation that followed. Those private details were not necessary for what needed to be done. I simply told him only the clear facts that truly mattered in the eyes of the law. "I want to sell a house immediately," I said calmly, "and this is the one." Then I carefully laid the official title document on his desk for review. His experienced eyes studied the paper closely for several minutes before he nodded in confirmation. "Everything is fully in your name without question," he replied, "and we can proceed right away without any complications." The quiet sound of his pen scratching across the first legal form felt far louder and more satisfying to me than any single strike my son had ever delivered. With each new page he prepared and I reviewed. The careful plan unfolded step by careful step, the quick listing process, the solid contracts, the establishment of a protective trust, and the search for serious buyers. There was nothing loud, dramatic, or violent in that warm office, just the slow and steady precision of true legality taking its course. Where my son David had chosen to use brutal fists against me, I now chose to use nothing but ink on official documents. Where he and Emily had used cruel laughter to humiliate, I now used complete and powerful silence as my response. We arranged every detail to be perfectly clean, airtight, and precise from start to finish. There would be no loopholes left open, no cracks for David to try crawling back through later. The sale would happen immediately and smoothly. Full ownership would transfer into brand new hands without any unnecessary delay. I specifically requested that the sale proceeds not return solely to me personally, but instead be carefully divided into a protected trust for those kind people who had always shown me genuine respect over the years, hard-working neighbors, reliable caretakers, and others who treated me with basic human kindness when my own son refused to do so. The lawyer wrote every single clause with great care, making absolutely certain that everything remained completely ironclad and legally unbreakable. I signed each important paper slowly and deliberately, my hand never shaking even once. Each firm stroke of my pen felt exactly like driving a heavy hammer blow. Not into wood this time, but directly against years of unchecked arrogance and cruelty. I clearly remembered teaching young David how to properly hold a hammer all those years ago, how to build things that lasted, and how to respect the true weight and responsibility of any tool. Now, at long last, I was finally showing him the far greater weight of something much heavier, a father's quiet but devastating justice delivered through the law. By the time every document was fully completed and signed, I felt noticeably lighter inside than I had in many painful years. The lawyer reached across the desk, shook my hand firmly, and confirmed once more that everything was now absolutely final and binding. Once the new buyers officially move in and take possession, there will be nothing your son can legally do to reverse any of this, he assured me. I thanked him sincerely for his help and stepped back outside into the sharp, cleaner morning air of Chicago. I had not raised my voice even slightly during the entire process. I had not struck back with my own hands in anger. But I had struck something far deeper and more permanent than any temporary bruise could ever be. I thought quietly about David sitting at his workplace downtown, probably laughing casually with his coworkers and bragging about his comfortable life as usual. He remained completely unaware that at that very same hour, total strangers were already walking through the rooms he wrongly believed he owned forever. They were examining walls I paid for, opening closets he filled, and planning excitedly where their own children might one day sleep. David had no idea that the very house where he raised his violent hand against me 25 times was already slipping permanently from his grasp. The strong legal thread had been woven tight and secure, and he possessed no scissors sharp enough to ever cut through it. His fists held no power against official documents. His overgrown pride could never erase stamped seals of approval. His wife's recorded laughter could not rewrite established law in any courtroom. The house had always been mine to give generously in the beginning, and now it was fully mine to take away just as decisively. When I finally returned to the house that evening, I sat once again at the same familiar wooden kitchen table where so much pain had begun. The old shoebox now sat empty beside me. The crucial title was gone forever, safely transferred into the capable hands of the law. The faint marks from David's slaps still lingered slightly on my face, but something much stronger now filled my chest completely. The clear knowledge that I had answered years of humiliation, not with explosive rage, but with something quiet and permanent instead. He had left temporary marks across my aging skin that would fade soon enough. I had permanently taken the very ground right out from under his entitled feet forever. The long-awaited day finally arrived without any warning or fanfare. David woke up that morning as usual, stretched comfortably in bed, kissed Emily lightly on the cheek, and left for work still laughing confidently to himself. His proud steps carried the same careless swagger of a man who truly believed nothing in the world could ever touch or threaten him. He did not once glance in my direction as he walked out. He did not acknowledge or remember the fading bruises he had put on my face. He never even considered the possibility that the title I once held might still matter. To him, the house remained his unbreakable kingdom no matter what. To me, it was already completely gone from his life forever. Not long after his car pulled away, several vehicles began arriving in the driveway one by one. First came the experienced realtor carrying thick folders of paperwork, followed quickly by professional movers hauling empty boxes and protective wrapping materials. They walked confidently through the front door he once called entirely his own, without any hesitation whatsoever. Complete strangers stepped calmly into the living room where he hosted friends. Strangers opened bedroom closets he thought private. Strangers ran their hands along the sturdy banisters I had installed years ago. Emily suddenly emerged from the kitchen in shock, her eyes growing wide and her voice turning sharp with alarm. "What on earth is happening here?" she demanded loudly from anyone who would listen. The calm realtor simply handed her the official stack of sale papers without emotion. Emily scanned them quickly, but the legal words clearly meant nothing hopeful to her panicked mind. "This house has now been legally sold," the realtor explained firmly but politely. "Please begin gathering your personal things as soon as possible." Emily's face drained completely of color as reality hit her. She immediately began shouting and frantically calling David on her phone over and over. She waved the papers wildly in the air, but the professional movers simply continued their steady work without pause. Box after box was carefully packed and carried out the front door. Table legs were quickly unscrewed for easier transport. Chairs neatly stacked together. Family pictures gently removed from every wall. The entire house soon filled with the constant sounds of packing tape ripping, furniture scraping across floors, and heavy footsteps moving back and forth. Emily's voice cracked with growing desperation as she called David repeatedly. But he remained too far away at work to stop what had already been set irreversibly in motion. I stood quietly off in one corner the entire time, watching without any visible emotion. I did not smile triumphantly at their distress. I did not speak a single word to anyone. I simply observed as the comfortable life they had built entirely on my lifelong sacrifice was methodically carried out piece by piece right before their eyes. Each packed box that left through the door represented far more than just furniture leaving. It represented a long overdue lesson in humility finally being taught. Each rolled-up rug was not simply fabric being removed. It marked the permanent end of their unchecked arrogance and cruelty. The very walls themselves seemed to breathe a quiet sigh of relief as the rooms gradually emptied of their presence. By early noon, the house no longer resembled theirs in any meaningful way. All the cherished family photos had been taken down forever. Shelves stood completely bare and empty. Closets hung open with nothing left inside them. New potential buyers walked through excitedly, measuring windows for fresh curtains and discussing possible paint colors for a new beginning. The sound of their hopeful voices now filled the once toxic air while Emily sat trembling on the stairs. Phone still pressed desperately to her ear, she whispered frantic, broken words to a husband who could no longer save her from the consequences. I quietly remembered that terrible night when David slapped me 15 times without mercy. I remembered Emily's constant laughter and proud smirks throughout it all. I remembered how absolutely certain they both appeared that I held no real power to ever fight back. But here I now stood, completely steady and calm, while their carefully constructed world was systematically dismantled right in front of them. They had genuinely believed their cruelty would go forever unpunished in this life. They had believed their arrogance would somehow protect them from any real fallout. But they had forgotten the one person who always held the true deed from the very beginning. When the final box was finally carried out and loaded onto the waiting truck, I stepped slowly outside into the daylight. The movers finished securing everything safely. The realtor locked her important paperwork inside her car and prepared to leave. Emily remained sitting helplessly near the front door, her face buried deeply in her shaking hands. I walked past her slowly, without saying a single word or looking back. There was simply nothing left that needed to be said between us. The house was completely gone from their lives, sold quietly while David worked his normal shift, taken away as silently as they had once taken my dignity so many years ago. And as I walked steadily away down the familiar Illinois street, I felt no burning heat of anger, no explosive fire of triumph, no need for celebration, only a deep and lasting peace settling over me at last, because true justice had finally been served in complete silence. Evening eventually arrived along with the familiar sound of David's car pulling into the now empty driveway. I heard the heavy slam of his door and his confident footsteps approaching the house as always. He was still laughing casually on the phone with someone, his voice carrying that same proud and careless tone men use when they believe nothing can ever touch their perfect world. His key turned slowly in the lock, but the front door refused to swing open as he expected it would. He pushed harder with growing confusion and a deepening frown on his face. Finally, Emily opened the door from inside, her face deathly pale and streaked with fresh tears. She said absolutely nothing at first, simply handed him the thick stack of final sale papers in silence. David stepped inside hesitantly and immediately froze in total shock at what he saw. The house stood completely bare and empty all around him. The spacious living room where he once hosted loud gatherings with friends now contained no couch, no chairs, no pictures hanging on the walls, just vast empty floors and cold, hollow echoes bouncing everywhere. His carefree laughter died instantly in his throat. He stared around in disbelief, his mouth hanging half open, phone still clutched uselessly in his hand. He began shouting frantically, calling Emily's name, calling my name, shouting angrily at the empty air itself. His panicked voice filled the vacant space, but nothing and no one answered him back. He ran desperately from room to room searching for answers. The large dining table was completely gone without trace. Kitchen cabinets stood open and bare of everything. Bedroom closets hung empty with stripped shelves. Even the familiar hallway rug had been rolled up tightly and carried away forever. Every frantic step he took only brought more waves of panic crashing over him. His clenched fists slammed uselessly against the bare walls, his voice cracking into raw curses and pleas. Emily followed behind him slowly, crying openly now, her words broken and repeating how she had tried to warn him something felt wrong earlier. But David could not hear her through his own rising desperation. The cold truth spoke far louder than any weak excuse ever could. He finally found me sitting calmly in the empty kitchen on the one single chair that had been deliberately left behind, my old coat folded neatly across my lap. I did not stand up to greet him. I did not speak a word of explanation. I simply looked at him steadily with quiet eyes. David glared back at first, his chest heaving fast with rage, his fists still clenched tightly at his sides. "What did you do?" He roared loudly at me in accusation. I remained silent and simply pointed one finger toward the counter, where the realtor had left the final official copy of all the sale papers. He grabbed them roughly, his hands now trembling badly, his eyes scanning quickly over words he could never hope to change or undo. The burning rage slowly drained from his face bit by bit, not disappearing all at once, but gradually replaced by something entirely new he had never once shown me before. Raw fear and realization. "No," he began whispering repeatedly to himself. "No, this simply can't be happening." Emily leaned weakly against the nearest wall, her face streaked with endless tears, her voice barely audible as she confirmed, "It's gone. David, the entire house is truly gone forever." David turned back toward me slowly, his eyes wide with shock and almost pleading for some mistake. "Dad, you can't possibly. You wouldn't really do this to us," he stammered. "But I already had. Completely and finally." His voice cracked badly with emotion. His hands shook uncontrollably as reality sank in. But the heavy silence hanging between us proved far stronger than any of his desperate, pleading words. That silence told him everything he needed to know without mercy. That silence made it clear beyond doubt that this outcome was absolutely final and irreversible. He tried desperately to argue his case anyway, tried shouting about family rights and blood ties and shared history. But every single word simply bounced uselessly off the empty walls surrounding us. The law had already spoken clearly and permanently on the matter. His once powerful fists could never fight against signed ink on official documents. His overgrown pride could not erase stamped legal seals in any court. His past cruelty could not magically change the fact that the house no longer belonged to him in any way. When the professional movers eventually returned to collect the very last remaining items, David tried blocking the doorway in one final act of defiance. But they calmly showed him the stamped and approved papers once more. Legal documents always carry far more real weight than angry fists ever could. He stumbled backward helplessly as complete strangers carried out the final pieces of what used to be his comfortable life. Emily sank down slowly into a quiet corner, completely broken and silent at last, while David stood frozen in place, a man now stripped of absolutely everything he once valued. Watching his former kingdom disappear out the door forever, I rose slowly at last from the chair, carefully put on my old coat, and walked past him without hurry. Our shoulders brushed briefly as I passed, but neither of us spoke a single word in that moment. I left him standing alone in the middle of his own self-created ruin, surrounded by nothing but cold echoes and bare walls. The house he had always believed would remain his forever had quietly slipped away in just one single ordinary day. Sold completely while he worked his normal job. Taken away permanently while he laughed carelessly with others. Gone forever before he ever truly understood the real power he had mocked and dismissed so many years ago. The house itself was gone from their lives, but the deep ruin spread far beyond just those empty walls. It rippled outward steadily like circles on a pond after a heavy stone is thrown in. Word of everything traveled incredibly fast through our close-knit Illinois community, faster than I had even expected it would. Neighbors who once watched silently from their windows as David struck me now gathered in small groups by fences, openly whispering about the moving trucks and what they meant. They had personally seen him raise his hand against his own father 15 times. They had heard Emily's cruel laughter ringing out that night, and now they watched professional movers carry away every last piece of furniture from the driveway. Some neighbors shook their heads slowly in quiet disapproval of David. Some actually smirked with satisfaction at the turn of events. Others said softly among themselves that he finally got exactly what he had long deserved. Friends who once filled those rooms with loud noise and endless drinks suddenly stopped calling or texting altogether. They no longer answered David's desperate messages for help or support. They completely refused any visits from him after that day. They had once celebrated loudly inside his house, eaten freely at his table, and even clapped along when Emily mocked me openly. Now, when David needed allies the most, every single one of them vanished without trace. Pride like his never invites real pity from others. Arrogance never wins lasting friends or allies in the end. David now stood completely alone in ways he never imagined possible. Emily, who once smirked proudly as he raised his hand against me 15 times, now carried shame far heavier than any material possession ever could. At local stores in our Chicago suburb, she tried to shop normally but was quietly turned away by people who knew the full story. People whispered behind her back as she left empty-handed and humiliated. At community gatherings she once enjoyed, she now sat alone and silent, no longer the confident woman who laughed the loudest at others' pain. Her former friends deliberately distanced themselves completely, unwilling to stand beside someone who had mocked an elderly father and then lost absolutely everything as direct consequence. Even her fragmented apologies came far too late and far too softly to matter to anyone anymore. Even at David's regular job downtown, the damaging news followed him relentlessly like a shadow. Co-workers he once bragged to now looked at him very differently than before. Some laughed quietly behind his back at his sudden fall. Others deliberately avoided him at all costs, not wanting any association with his growing disgrace. He had once boasted endlessly about his beautiful house, expensive furniture, and lively parties to anyone who would listen. Now every bit of that was completely gone forever, and along with it went every ounce of respect he once enjoyed from others. His carefully built pride had rested entirely on borrowed walls that were never truly his to begin with. And when those walls finally fell away, his entire public image collapsed right along with them. The same deep humiliation he had deliberately inflicted on me now returned to him, multiplied many times over. He could no longer step outside his temporary apartment without feeling countless judgmental eyes following him everywhere. He could not walk down any familiar street without hearing fresh whispers trailing close behind him like ghosts. Every polite nod from passers-by or quick averted glance served as another painful reminder of that violent night he struck me, and the fateful day his house quietly vanished forever. What David once viewed as unbreakable strength had been revealed as nothing more than fragile weakness all along. What he believed was permanent power had transformed into deep, lasting shame he could not escape. I watched all of these consequences unfold from a respectful distance without any need to interfere. I did not gloat openly at their suffering. I did not celebrate their downfall in any visible way. I simply did not need to do anything more at that point. The surrounding world was now delivering the full justice I had quietly set in motion months earlier. My chosen silence had proven far louder and more effective than David's angry fists ever were. My careful decision now carried infinitely more weight than Emily's mocking laughter ever did. David finally learned the hardest lesson of his life. Not from any angry words shouted by me, but from the vast emptiness that now surrounded him completely. The same neighbors who once viewed me only as the pitiful old man in a worn coat now looked at me with newfound respect in their eyes. Some offered quiet nods of approval when our paths crossed. Others spoke soft words of encouragement like, "You did the right thing, sir." They fully understood the entire truth without me ever needing to speak it aloud myself. They had personally witnessed what David did to me that night. They had seen exactly what I chose to do in calm response, and they clearly recognized that long overdue balance had finally been restored to our community. My son David, who was once surrounded by material comfort and loud friends, now stood isolated in total ruin of his own making. Emily, who was once so proud and openly cruel, now tasted daily the same bitterness she had once served to me without remorse. The far-reaching social aftershock was never loud or explosive in nature. It remained slow, completely steady, and absolutely relentless in its impact, stripping them both of everything they once thought was permanently untouchable and secure. I walked away from that empty house carrying nothing but my familiar old coat and one small bag of personal belongings. Yet somehow my chest felt lighter and freer than it had in countless painful years. Behind me stood the solid house I had originally built with my own hands, now finally empty of David's toxic laughter and overwhelming pride, no longer chained in any way to my name or my pain. Ahead of me stretched the same quiet Illinois streets I had walked for decades, now lined with whispers that carried a very different tone. But this time, those whispers were no longer about my personal humiliation and defeat. They were about my quiet strength and eventual justice instead. They told the story of a devoted father who had been struck 15 times without mercy, publicly mocked in front of others, and yet still found a powerful way to answer everything without ever raising his own hand in violence. The house itself did not magically vanish from existence. It still stands proudly today in its familiar suburban Chicago neighborhood. Its sturdy bricks continue to hold strong against time and weather. Its reliable roof still keeps out the rain and snow each season. Its protective walls still echo with new sounds and new lives. But it no longer belongs in any way to David, who once believed repeated fists could erase 30 full years of quiet sacrifice from his father. It no longer belongs to Emily, who smirked and clapped as she watched him strike me without remorse. It now belongs entirely to complete strangers who will treat it with the genuine respect it always deserved. Strangers who earned their ownership honestly, through their own hard labor, not through my lifelong sacrifice alone. And that simple fact feels completely right, and just in every possible way. I gave my son David absolutely everything a father could possibly give over the years. I gave him practical tools to build a good life, valuable lessons to live honorably, and a beautiful home where he could safely raise his own family someday. I gave and gave until there was truly nothing left for me to offer him, and in cruel return for all of it, he gave me 25 harsh slaps across the face while his wife Emily laughed and recorded every moment. That was his ultimate gift to the father who raised him. My gift back to him in the end was nothing but cold, unshakable silence delivered without warning. Silence that quietly sold his house while he worked an ordinary day. Silence that methodically emptied every closet and room he once claimed. Silence that left him standing alone in total ruin with nothing but regret to keep him company. He will remember that life-changing day every single time he passes an empty wall that once held his pictures. He will remember it whenever a former neighbor deliberately turns away without greeting him. He will remember it every time he feels the crushing weight of shame pressing heavily on his own chest, the way it once pressed on mine. And he will know, deep inside, without any remaining doubt, that it was never explosive anger that ultimately ruined his comfortable life. It was not loud shouting or threats. It was certainly not returned fists or violence of any kind. It was simply the quiet hand of the same father he once mocked and struck, calmly signing away the very ground he arrogantly stood upon for so many years. I still wear my same old coat every day through Chicago winters. It continues to keep me warmer than any luxury the lost house ever provided him. Warmer than the pride he wasted so carelessly. Warmer than the cruel laughter that once cut me deeper than knives. That worn coat no longer represents shame or defeat to me anymore. It represents survival through harsh winters my son could never endure even a single day of alone. It is living proof that I bent under pressure many times, but never fully broke as a man. And now when I walk these familiar Illinois streets daily, that same coat feels noticeably lighter on my shoulders because deep humiliation no longer weighs it down like it once did. Final thought. He slapped me 15 times right on his own floors that I still legally owned. I sold those very floors quietly while he worked his normal job. I watched the entire life he built while scorning me carried away safely in boxes. And I left him surrounded by nothing but the silence he once thought meant weakness. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.